Hello, good morning. Can you hear me, Thomas, Alex?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah, I hear you well.
Thank you. I'm muting all the other participants. So welcome to this webinar. We will start in a second. I just wanted to, before we start, we just had a few basic instructions into how this webinar works. We see that some participants are still logging in. Just to be clear, in case somebody doesn't have the occasion to follow live, there will be the occasion, of course, to have access to the recording after the webinar, and this will be available on the website of Webinar Wednesday. And having said that, I will then move soon to present and set the scene. We have about 1 hour program, so maybe we can stop now the holding presentation. And in 1 hour, we have 4 exciting presentations. First of all, I'd like to thank Danfoss, especially for sponsoring this session and making it possible. This opens officially the session for webinars during 2017. And we have, to start with this year, we will focus on policies at the EU level that have an impact on the sector of heating and cooling applications. And what we are doing today will be looking at, it's okay, I will load my own presentation, sorry. What we'll look today, it's, okay, sorry, thanks. It's just, please put on the slideshow. Looking at different sectors actually that have an impact on heating and cooling applications. So I will just share my screen and hopefully you will be able to see this. So in terms of very brief overview, what is sustainable cooling in the EU, a cross-sector perspective? That's my introduction. I will then introduce the other speakers. So myself, I'm Chief Operating Officer and Head of Media. And as such, I'm one of the co-founders of shecco, who is working exclusively with natural refrigerants in HVAC and R applications, and responsible for communication platforms from shecco, from the websites rcm44.com, Hydrocarbons21, and Ammonia21, Accelerate magazines, webinars, and also coordinating global projects for shecco. Very briefly about this webinar, you saw some instructions before we started. Very important for today's sessions, we have several speakers. We would welcome questions to the speakers, and we would be happy to use this for the panel debate. You have a setting in the webinar menu where you can type in your question. And there's another function which is quite interesting, and maybe we can test this also later with some basic questions, where you can click on raise hand, and this can mark just to mark your agreement. So for example, we have a question about is this conference interesting for you? And then you click raise hand if you agree, and this will give us a very quick way to have feedback. Also, if you have any technical questions for the webinar regarding sound, regarding settings, you can also send us via the Q&A section. The agenda is quite charged, so first we'll be setting the scene into the topic, and then we have brief keynote presentations on public affairs and lessons learned from 2 key events. Well, we had the Decarb Heat event taking place recently in Brussels, so we will hear a bit more about that. And we have an upcoming EU Sustainable Energy Week taking place early June, early to mid-June, where we have also several topics of relevance for this sector. So the speakers of today are Alex Champry. She's the Director of Public Affairs at Danfoss. She will be talking about public affairs trends for the sector, and specifically on industrial and commercial refrigeration markets. We have also Ingo Wagner, who's a policy manager in Euro Heat and Power, and he will give us his view, both from the policy side and also from the event side. Then next we'll have Thomas Novak, Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association, who organized a successful conference recently on the new concept of decarb heat, and we'll hear more about that from Thomas. And finally, we'll have Christine Weika, who's the Secretary General of the European Cold Storage and Logistics Association, who will give us the overview more from the perspective of the cold storage, the industrial refrigeration end. And next to this, what we'd like to do after a brief overview by each speaker is to have a brief panel debate looking forward. And instead of, in terms of once we have set the scene, we have seen an overview from different perspectives. would like to look into what the industry can do further and what are the challenges coming up ahead. So very briefly, after that, to set the scene, we see what are the key trends in sustainable cooling that we see, and this is based on research and the analysis by Shecco from the market. What we see is, well, there is interesting new policy developments right now, supporting increasing energy efficiency. And this is also, of course, linked to climate change legislation. So the several initiatives are now under discussion at the EU level. First, the winter package, which encompasses several pieces of legislation which are relevant not only for heating and cooling applications, but also for other sectors that have an impact on the sector and have a cross-cutting effect. We have several drivers to improve efficiency from equipment, including eco-design rules, standards associated to these rules, energy efficient labeling legislation, a directive including the minimum efficiency requirements for different types of equipment. So all this is leading towards efforts to reduce the power consumption, reduce the energy consumption in the first place, and making it more sustainable. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. I lost this slide. Second, what we see is all these climate change legislation is leading to investments in climate change, climate-friendly technologies. And what we see is companies that have traditionally not looked into this sector or looked into alternatives to current equipment or to energy-consuming equipment are now looking into climate-friendly alternatives. And this is leading up to new opportunities in the market. And finally, what we see is there is, of course, legislation and effort to target and have specific targets for different sectors. And so what is interesting, what we see is that more and more you see how different sectors are cooperating as well to create a bigger impact. So for example, we'll hear more today about the integration from the uses of energy or the uses of heating and cooling applications, how they can also connect to the energy grid and how this connection can create opportunities to reduce the overall impact. And with this, I finalize the scene setting, and we will then go to the first keynote presentation. Is by Alex Chambry, Director of Public Affairs at Danfoss. Alex, the floor is yours.
Yes, so I would like to share my screen if you allow me.
Yep. Please go ahead.
Okay, so do you see my slide?
Yes, we can see your slide. If you can.
Okay, so I have been asked to explain how the Clean Energy for All package, you said the winter package, it's the same, how it will impact sustainable cooling in Europe. So in my presentation, I will first describe the vision of policymakers, and I will highlight 5 big regulatory trends that will arise from the adoption of this package that will deeply shape the cooling sector. So what is the vision? The vision is, of course, a decarbonized cooling market by 2050, but it's also a leading profitable and competitive cooling sector, obviously. And then the final point, which it is consumers at the center. And here I would like to emphasize a schizophrenic position sometimes of policymakers, because on the one side, we expect an exponential increase of the total demand for space cooling. Probably the EU market for space cooling equipment is midway from saturation. So on the one side, we expect huge increase of the demand. On the other hand, we want to decarbonize our sector. So that leads to some tension among some policymakers, some NGOs. And where we are strong, really deeply convinced in Danfoss and at the European Commission, for example, is that cooling is not a luxury. Cooling is about health, it's not only comfort and well-being, it's about health, it's about reducing premature deaths of elderly people in the summer, it's about increased productivity at work. So fundamentally, the vision is also to provide access to all to affordable and sustainable cooling. And that is a big vision for sustainable cooling in Europe. And this is what the winter package, or so-called clean energy for all package, should help to deliver. So 5 regulatory trends. How will the clean energy for all Europeans package impact the sector? The trend number 1 is that it will decrease the cooling demand at the relative cooling demand at the building level. And this trend will be driven by the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive. If you need the details, I can reply in the Q&A session. So basically, there is a goal that the building stock should be fully decarbonized by 2050, that all new buildings should be nearly zero energy buildings by starting in 2018 for public buildings and 2020 for all existing buildings. And this will greatly impact the cooling demand and also products, because in a highly insulated buildings, it has a mixed trend. On the one side, it should decrease the relative cooling demand. On the other, in some cases, it leads to the opposite effect. Sorry, I get a message from you. But opposite effect because of internal heat gains. And this will, as I said, it will impact product development for us. The next trend is increased share of renewable energy sources. Someone is playing with my slides. Can you?
I think we just put your slide on the full screen.
Ah, that's why. Okay, thank you. So the increased share of renewable energy sources in the 2030 Climate and Energy Framework, it is already agreed that we should reach a binding 27% share of renewable energy in the total EU energy consumption, leading to 45% in electricity generation. So this is quite an ambitious target. It might be even further increased within the negotiation on the Renewable Energy Directive. And this will also have a huge impact on the cooling sector for several reasons. First, cooling products are enabler of renewable energy sources. And this means that heat pumps will gain a growing role. I will not talk too much about heat pumps because I know that Thomas Novak will do it. It means also that district cooling has a major role to play, and we have the example, for example, of Paris, where they developed a wide district cooling grid, very efficient, using the temperature differential of the river Seine. So again, the same for district cooling. I will not go into detail because Ingo will probably do that for us. And then, of course, a growing share of renewable energy sources means increased need for energy storage and demand-side management. I will come back to that later. Another trend is the trend for more efficient and sustainable products. And you have already mentioned that before. This is mainly driven by eco-design and energy labeling directives. And what is important to know is that eco-design and energy labeling directives were stalled for a while, and within the Clean Energy for All package that was released at the end of November, the European Commission finally released the eco-design work plan. And this means that work will keep on in this field. And here I have listed some of the products that will be impacted. So the work on the commercial refrigeration will keep going, smart appliances. And the work plan also defines new product groups that will be regulated under eco-design and energy labeling framework, and that include for the cooling sector, refrigerated containers and building automation and controls. And then I would like to emphasize that the gradual phase down of HFC refrigerants that is set in the F-gas regulation will also accelerate the market penetration of efficient and sustainable products, because they would speed up the refurbishment of the existing installations. So this is rather positive for our sector. Trend number 4, system approach. Eco-design and energy labeling have had a huge impact. They have led to decrease estimated at around 40% of the energy consumption of covered products by 2030. On the other hand, eco-design is only the first step. The next big game changer is a system approach. And the clean energy package will really promote and accelerate optimization at system level. That's what we are convinced. And the main driver are the Article 8 and 15 of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, that we promote the adoption of energy performance requirement for cooling systems, strengthening of inspections requirement, and as an alternative mandatory requirement on building automation and controls. And the impact on the industry will be huge, both in terms of competitiveness, because you have huge efficiency gains to be gained from a system approach. And another step change is the integration of heating and cooling. And what is very important in this system thinking is the recovery of unavoidable waste heat in two directions. Cooling, they produce heat, cooling processes produce heat, and you can recover that heat, for example, for space heating. In a local supermarket in Denmark, the recovery of waste heat produced by the cooling process allowed to reduce the annual savings on gas by 27,000 euro per year. So this has a direct impact on the bottom line of supermarkets. But waste heat recovery can also be used in non-electrical cooling process for cooling purposes. So this is a huge potential that requires from us industry a change of mindset and also investments in product development. For example, optimized heat recovery units. And the final trend I would like to emphasize is the growing digitalization that will be enabled by the package and sector coupling. And this will be driven by the electricity market design regulatory framework and again the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So the impact on the industry, I have little time, so we can discuss that in the Q&A. Connected product, big data, Internet of Things, those are the buzzwords. And here you have a picture of Coolits. It's a solution developed by Danfoss that allows the tracking of food across the entire supply chain. And as you know, in Europe, we estimate that 9% of food loss is due to inefficient refrigeration. So this type of solutions can have a huge impact on the sustainability of our food sector. So this is an example about the potential. There is much more. Another huge potential is the sector coupling. And here you see a picture of a supermarket to explain the vision. Supermarkets, for example, they can be turned into micro power plants. They can be used to store energy, to produce energy, for demand side management. So this is the next game changer in the upcoming decade. So to conclude, I believe the Clean Energy for All package will bring four game changers in our sector. This is the system approach, the integration of heating and cooling, sector coupling, and the digitalization. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Alix. And I'm sorry I forgot to give, of course, the full introduction of our speaker, of Alix. She is, of course, not only now the director of EU Public Affairs at Danfoss, based in Brussels, but she has more than 13 years of experience in EU policy, and she has a background also not only in Danfoss. She's been working with the Michelin Group and also with La Poste, French companies, and even some experience at the European Commission in the Director General for Energy. So obviously she's been very much involved in following climate and energy legislation. She's also the president of EURASE, the association, and we has a background on political science in Strasbourg and economics by College of Europe in Athens, in Poland. Maybe just to follow up on your presentation, because maybe some participants are not familiar with Danfoss, and you presented some of the solutions. Danfoss does basically a full range of different solutions, not only for heating and cooling, but also for different industrial sectors. From your perspective, from all the different package of legislation that it's now been discussed at the EU level, what is the main priorities for Danfoss for the next year? I mean, what is it that the main message you would like to bring to the EU decision makers when it comes to the discussions on all these, winter package, the energy efficiency directive, and so on?
Well, basically, I already replied to your questions in my presentation. It is acceleration of investment in system optimization. And for that, there are a number of requirements in the Buildings Directive that needs to be strengthened. And this includes the full use of the potential of building automation and controls, and that will allow maintenance, preventive maintenance, continuous commissioning, things like that. Then it is, when we talk about renewable energy, to consider as well a recovery of unavoidable waste heat as part of the solution, because there is an enormous potential, and we are simply spreading waste heat in the air every day, and this is a heat that can be recovered. And as cooling produces so much waste heat, we believe this can be a game changer for our industry. And this required investment from the sector, but this investment can be accelerated if we get the right policy framework. And then sector coupling, electricity storage, demand side management.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We now move on to our next speaker, is Ingo Wagner. He's now the policy manager at Euroheat and Power. It's the Euroheat and Power is a technology platform. So Ingo is in charge of energy and policy issues in the fields of efficiency, buildings, and technical questions, as well as the EHPA's district cooling branch. So while coordinating also internal groups on resource efficiency and district cooling. So he's very much an expert on everything related to district and infrastructure. So Ingo represents this sector in various organizations and platforms such as the Coalition for Energy Savings, Euroforest, Knowledge for Innovation and Technology Platform, Smart Networks for the Energy Transition. So having said this, Ingo, your presentation is ready. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead. He will give us a brief overview of their activities and setting the scene. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the nice introduction. I will actually focus less on the activities of Euroheat and Power as a district heating and district cooling association, but more on the bigger picture and activities that we do with a lot of other actors, and a few of them are involved here. We know that there are a lot of solutions for more sustainable cooling out there. So that's not the problem, but we face a lot of other problems when we talk about cooling. And the first problem is actually, if we talk to people and say, what do you think about cooling? A lot of them just say, why? I don't need cooling, because maybe they don't have air conditioning at home. But if you talk to them a bit more, actually cooling is just everywhere. And was mentioned before with the supermarkets, for example, but it's the whole food chain, and we will hear about this later. We need to cool our products to avoid food waste. We need cooling in the heavy industries, although for a lot of us it's just wasted heat, but for them it's a cooling service. We have more and more digital there. We have more and more data centers that need cooling to run. And indeed, also in the building stock, we need more and more cooling. And I have to slightly disagree with what Alex said, because in the current state, the Buildings Directive will not decrease the cooling demand, because if you add the cooling service to the building, you're allowed to use more energy than before. And more people want cooling in their homes. And actually, I could have never imagined this for myself. But in the last nights, I decided that I clearly need some cooling in my home too. Still, it's a very complex issue, but the sleeping one might be a personal one. Now, we had a congress 2 weeks ago in the UK, and for them it might be different, but who of us likes a warm drink, whatever it is? So there are a lot of personal issues, if we think about it, that link us to cooling. Now, as a district cooling person, I could just say, well, okay, we need cooling, let's use district cooling. What's the issue with just needing more cooling? Well, it's the dimension. And although at the moment cooling is far smaller than heating, estimations say that in theory, the cooling demand just in the building sector could increase by 900% until 2050. Could. That's a maximum estimate. This would mean 210 gigawatt of additional cooling capacity just in buildings. And this is enormous. So there is an issue for the energy system, and as Alex said, also for health and many other issues. Now, we have the issue, we have the tools and policy that we could use, but actually we don't really use them, and there's a lot that we don't do and don't know. So therefore, about 2 years ago, we started a process with a lot of stakeholders that peaked in the, or is going to peak in the upcoming launch of the Cooling EU Forum. The Cooling EU Forum brings together nearly 20 stakeholders by now, either as supporters or observers, and that includes Danfoss, EHPA, and also EXLA. And we try to connect the whole cooling sector. So everything from steel industry via buildings down to refrigeration. We have cold transport technology providers, cities, and a lot more to get this integrated approach. And in our discussions, we saw that we all share a few problems all together, and we are trying to address them. And the big one, first of all, is awareness. If people don't know about cooling, they are not going to take care of it. So we need to raise awareness, which you here see as point 3. This comes from our communication paper. Raise awareness among all the people that might be involved in it. The second thing is bring them together. We need to link all the people. We need to link all the sectors to get an integrated solution. And then member states and the EU need to take this knowledge, need to take what they get and address the issue. But there are 2 other parts to it. It's not just about policy and awareness. Well, to say it bluntly, we need more money, especially in the field of research. Generally in the energy sector, a lot of money flows to electricity grid matters. Then we have money for heating or heating and cooling, but it's for research and the wider discussion. When it's heating and cooling, most of it goes to heating, which is very important, but we should get some dedicated funds for cooling. And one issue that is often forgotten, and actually currently we have the discussion also with the Commission and some member states, it's all about numbers. As said, the increase in cooling in the building stock is an estimate, but we're really missing a lot of numbers. We need data. There's no real reporting in Eurostat. IEA tries to do it, but we all need to come together and collect this data to see what is the actual issue, what do we do with it. If you want to hear more about it, you're invited on the 19th of June to the official launch event of Cooling EU with a lot of fantastic speakers from the sector. It's a half-day event. If you can make it over to Brussels during USEF, you're invited.
Okay, thank you, Ingo. As you can see, Ingo is sitting on our office in Brussels, so that makes it easy. Perhaps just one little question. Maybe people are not familiar with the event that you're organizing, is it part of the Sustainable Energy Week?
Yes, it is. It's not one of the high-level policy events because somebody in the Commission decided that cooling was not important enough for that. We hope to change this in the future, of course, but it is one of the energy days, and it's right in the beginning of the Energy Week, close to the Commission, so very easy to find.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ingo. And there's an invitation for everybody who's available or with a further interest in the topic. There's definitely several sessions which are of relevance for the sector during the energy Green Energy Week organized by the Commission in mid-June. Next, we will hear from Thomas Novak. So Thomas Novak is a Secretary General for the European Heat Pump Association. He joined back in 2006, and which he's the Secretary General since 2009. So obviously he represents the sector of heat pumps in Europe, and not only in Brussels but also via the member associations and the members of the association all around Europe. So this includes taking part in consultations, in contacts with the EU institutions, the Commission, Parliament, Council. And next to this, to participate in other initiatives dealing or related to the sector. And as such, for example, he's also a member of the board of the European Technology Platform on Renewable Heating and Cooling. Thomas, the floor is yours. So you will be talking essentially about your recent conference on decarb heat and what you see what was the most interesting learnings from what came out from the conference.
Now you should be able to hear me.
Yep.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Indeed, I will not talk so much about heat pumps, but I will talk about a cross-sectoral perspective, and I will talk about this initiative that we have started that is actually supported by a large number of other associations, some of them even participating today in this conference, which we have called Decarb Heat. And I have updated the presentation here to add cooling to it because logically, if we want to decarbonize the heating sector and if we understand that the cooling sector is connected to it, then we need to decarbonize both heating and cooling at the same time. If you could show me the next slide, or can I do that? Can I change the slide? No. Can you change the slide, please? Yeah. So the first question, and here you can see already that even in our presentations we have added cooling to it. Why is it crucial to decarbonize the heating and cooling sector? It was just not as catchy to say decarb heat and cool, so we kept it at decarb heat for the event. Next slide, please. Then the next slide. This is my favorite slide on this. No, the previous one, because it shows the party. Can you go back one? It shows the party of the people partying after they have made the agreement in Paris, December 2015, and they had agreed that it would be a great idea to limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade max. And obviously we all agree, because with the current temperatures here in Brussels and across Europe, we don't want it even hotter than that. Otherwise, cooling demand will increase further. And then if we look at the next slide, then we see the real work that is behind it. This shows you the simulations of a couple of thousand possible pathways in terms of global carbon emissions until 2100. And it also shows that if we want to limit ourselves to a maximum global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade, then we have to go to 0 or even negative emissions around 2050. There's a lot of research behind it. I think it's quite robust. So the question is not if somebody likes to decarbonize heating or likes to decarbonize cooling. It is a mandatory effort that we all have to take if we want to achieve this limitation of the global warming altogether. The next slide, please. And here we see the disappointing reality. The disappointing reality is that the red bar shows what the member states have agreed to, and the green and the blue bars shows what we have to do. So you can understand that without any action, we would even end up in the gray bar, which is the business as usual scenario. And it's quite a it's quite a distance between what would happen as a business as usual, which is still supported by some people even here in Brussels, and what is necessary. You could say it's a full swing, a full turn of the whole industry. Next slide, please. And here is some numbers that Ingo has rightfully pointed out. We need more numbers, and this has been done by a consortium that included Fraunhofer, and I think it's the most robust piece of information that you can find at the moment. And we see here that heating and cooling is 50% of the final energy demand in the European Union. We can also see that cooling at the moment is actually quite small. So while we need to stress it, as I agree, and we all agree in this group that says cooling EU is necessary, cooling is not a luxury, but still it's a small sector. And if we don't finish the heating sector in decarbonization terms, then we'll not achieve anything with addressing cooling. So it's very important to integrate the two and to go forward in the direction of the systems approach that also Alex has mentioned. Next slide, please. So my interim conclusion on this is that we cannot decarbonize society, which is necessary if we don't address heating and cooling. And we are also convinced, also in this group, that typically we have all the technologies available. We know how to insulate a building. We also know how to cool it. We know how to do this with renewable energy. And so we don't really need additional technical innovation, but we need a legal framework that makes it attractive to use renewable and no emission sources to provide heating and cooling to Europe. Next, please. Next. So what the consequence of this is, we think we need to rethink the industry. Now here it still says heating industry, but it includes the cooling industry in terms of R&D, manufacturing, installation, and maintenance. And I think what's critical about that is that we have about 35 years to do that. And that is the really limiting factor, because the way the speed of change that we see at the moment here in Brussels, but maybe even worldwide, is not sufficient to achieve this. The renovation rate in building doesn't provide the necessary speed, and I guess in cooling it's the same. Next slide, please. So we created this Decarb Heat initiative, and the Decarb Heat initiative follows this vision of 100% decarbonized heating and cooling system in Europe by 2050. It has four components. It has an industry pledge that is signed by the major manufacturers of heating and cooling equipment, where they say we are ready to deliver. It has a number of policy requests that goes to policymakers saying, guys, you need to create a framework that makes it possible to align the individual decision makers' economic rationale and the 2 degrees centigrade global warming target. And then we have a support document that can be signed by many others that are not directly affected by renewable heating and cooling, but that are in line with the idea. And we will as a next step, we will have an industry platform that is set up for fall. It will be set up in cooperation with the European Commission in order to determine how we can integrate the sectors in a most efficient way and how we can really achieve a decarbonized sector by 2050. And obviously, everybody in this room, if you have any interest in this, then please look at www.decarbheat.eu, and there is all the documents available for further study. Next slide, please. In the end, what we need to achieve is an integrated system, as we have said already, and you can see here that we have 4 vectors that need to be decarbonized: mobility, electricity, heating, and cooling. And now I'm quite happy because heat pumps play an important role in this, but also district grids will play an important role in other technologies. So it's not a single solution. And that creates the challenge in this. The challenge is that we connect the different solutions that we have today with information technology, with more sensors, in order to have a more efficient system. And in order to get there, then we would look at the next slide. In order to get there, we need a pathway, and this pathway, this is still open. I don't know anybody that has a proper idea so far of how to get there, let's say in 5-year intervals. And even if we talk about the clean energy for all package, that is not sufficient to bring us close to a decarbonized system. So it can only be considered the first step. Next slide, please. So renewable cooling, next slide, please. There was 2 slides on that. And this is more or less my idea about this. It's not agreed with everybody else. So I put a my in front of it. It must be very clear. My first paradigm of cooling is you need to understand if you need cooling, typically there is a direct connection to solar irradiation. This is what the 2 graphs show. And typically cooling you need more in summer, at least in the residential area. And in summer, in the future, we will have a lot of renewable electricity. So from an electricity perspective and from an energy provision perspective, probably cooling is not such a big problem. I had a very intense discussion with a professor from the University of Leuven, and she said to me, Thomas, it's more important to reduce the energy demand in winter, So in order also to insulate the buildings. In summer, the cooling part with proper design we can handle. Last slide, please. Next one. And my second paradigm of cooling is whenever you need cooling, you can have heating for free. And that's what Alix also said. The cooling equipment in supermarkets is providing waste heat all the time. It's not used at the moment. And that's where the heat pump or the refrigeration cycle comes into play. Whenever we need the cooling part, then we have heat for free. You can also say the other way around. Whenever you need heat, you have cooling for free. And you can use it for district grids, you can use it for hot water production, or you can use it for other purposes that you may like, a swimming pool or similar. But again, this supports the idea that we need to integrate the different technologies and that we have the technologies available, and more or less, we need to look at the design of the future system that we want. I will close here because I think we are running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for the presentation. That was very condensed, but definitely very interesting. Maybe just a quick question before we move on to the next topic. You mentioned, I mean, one of the main framework that you mentioned was the Paris Agreement and how it's perceived as a success in international negotiations. Now, we've been hearing news from the US about the hesitations in terms of actually ratifying the Paris Agreement. Obviously, this is more at the macro level, but let's say if this were to happen, this would probably have knock-on consequences on different sectors as well in different initiatives, at least in the US. What would you see that is the risk or opportunity, perhaps, of the EU if this were to happen? Or what could be the possible reaction at the EU level if this were to happen?
I personally think that Mr. Trump is making a lot of noise around this at the moment. I think what I hear from the industry side wants the United States to stay in this Paris Agreement, and I cannot see why they should leave, because the cost reduction that we see in photovoltaic and wind electricity will make it much cheaper. And the cooling technology mainly is an electric technology at the moment, mainly. I mean, there's other solutions, but the dominant energy source for cooling is electricity. If electricity gets cheaper and if we get flexible electricity prices as it is foreseen in the electricity market design for fall and then introduced in Europe in next year, then it will become interesting to roll out these solutions, interesting for industry. So you could even say, if the market design is proper, whatever framework is behind it doesn't matter so much, because it becomes attractive to offer these solutions in the marketplace as commercially viable products.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely keep an eye on that because it's a very relevant topic. Now we move on to our next speaker, and we close in the session for keynote speeches. Will be Christine Weicker. She's the Secretary General for the European Cold Storage and Logistics Association. So Christine has a master's degree in political science from the University of Vienna in Austria. And she was appointed in her current position as Secretary General for the European Cold Storage and Logistics Association in 2013. Before, she started her professional career as an advisor to a member of the European Parliament, and also as a policy advisor with the European Association for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. So she has a long experience in the EU public affairs arena, and especially in the area of environment in this industrial sector. So Christina, you've been presenting on behalf of the association and the challenges and the opportunities also for the cold storage sector. Floor is yours, Christina.
Thank you very much, and thank you also very much for the invitation and for the very interesting presentation so far. Just one question. Can you see my slide?
Yes, you can see your slide. If you can press on making it full screen, that would probably be useful for everybody. Yeah.
Just a second. Here you go. So I think I will be rather brief. Looking at the clock, we have another 10 minutes, I think, left. As I said, thank you very much for the presentations. my presentation is going to be a little bit different because I'm actually going to present to you from a sector point of view and what the European Cold Storage and Logistics Association is all about and what our members are doing, because they effectively are end users of cooling. And this is the first thing I always raise, and what we have also discussed broadly in the Cooling EU initiative is, what is it actually when we say cooling? What do we mean? Because for our members, it means refrigeration and industrial refrigeration, and this is a process that is completely different from air conditioning, for example, and it is imminently needed to have safe food, to avoid food waste, and to be able to distribute via our very long supply chains all kinds of food from all over the world to the final customer. Well, just a little bit about our associations. We are an association of associations. We have national federations as members, and we deal with everything that's connected to the temperature-controlled storage and logistics. So we are the voice of all of these aspects on the European level. As I said, our members are a crucial link in the food supply chain because they do connect the producers, so the farmers, for example, a processing company, food industry, with retailers and the ultimate customer. I have a very small graph. I hope you can see that. That's, of course, also a simplified version of the whole food supply chain, but it starts with the sourcing, then you have the production, manufacturing, and then in the middle, right in the middle, you see distribution and storage, and also transportation. You see a truck there and an airplane. That's all the, what's missing is a ship, actually. I can see that now. So lots of our members, for example, also do operate facilities in ports where they receive the goods from the containers from all over the world. They do customs and clearance checks, and they make sure that the cold chain is always preserved. So what do they do? In the refrigerated warehouses, which you have to imagine as basically a big box or a big fridge, where you can regulate the temperature and where all the products are stored in conditions that are appropriate for their specificities. So, for example, we freeze and store and distribute raw materials, fruit, vegetables, fish, also milk and dairy products, ready-made meals, convenient food, but also frozen food like frozen pizza and ice cream. And on the other hand, going away from the food, there are also other products that need cooling or refrigeration. That's flowers, for example, or pharmaceuticals, which are very, of course, valuable products. All of those goods are stored in the cold stores of our members. But of course, it's not so simple because there's not just one kind of temperature. And I already mentioned it, different kinds of temperatures are required for different kinds of foods. You might have noticed that when you put a banana in the fridge, it doesn't last that long as it should be. So there are different temperature ranges. You have ambient, you have chilled, but of course also frozen. And recently I visited a facility where they have in the cold store facility 20 different temperature ranges. So that's extraordinary, but it does exist. And this is one statement I would like to put in front of you, that all chilled and frozen food and temperature-controlled pharmaceutical products are stored in a cold store at least once during their journey from production to the consumer. So you can, I think this illustrates very nicely the importance and the linking function of our sector. As Ingo mentioned, we have a very clear lack in data that also concerns our sector. So we have only estimates of how big the sector is and how big the storage capacity is. So we expect, we estimate that there are approximately 2,500 public cold stores, 7,500 private cold stores, and more than 150,000 smaller cold stores. So what does all of this mean? Public cold stores, that's a service from third-party logistics providers. The private cold stores are usually connected to the food industry, and as well as the smaller ones. So that's rather, if you do the math, that's quite some capacity. Our priorities are very simple and very straightforward: food safety, food hygiene, traceability of the goods, digitalization of the sector has been mentioned. That's also a huge topic in our sector, because I think it was Alex who had the slide of where you could see the temperature of the goods along the whole journey. That's already been implemented, so many solutions do already include that, and customers of our members do have the possibility already to check via an online application the location of their goods in a cold store, the temperature of the good, and so on. And of course, energy and energy efficiency, always a top priority. This includes for me also the HFC phase down, which is going to be a challenge for many of our member companies, especially due to the fact that some producers of high GWP producers of refrigerants have already increased the prices significantly. And also some have said that they are going to stop selling the high GWP refrigerants as of next year. I think for an industrial refrigeration operation, it's a little bit more difficult to change to new alternatives, because the investment is much bigger. And once you have decided for a certain technology, you have to work with the technology for, I would say, at least 30 years, which is the amortization time. So, but all of the cold stores that are being newly built, the vast majority run on ammonia, for example. So that's under control, but we are going to have interesting discussions how we get and how the supply with refrigerants as of 2018 and 2019 is going to be done. And of course, I've tried to explain the complexity of the supply chain and the size of the supply chain. So everything that's connected to this and to the logistics of it is very, very important for us. And I would like to conclude with to repeat the invitation that Ingo has extended. On 19th of June, we're going to launch Cooling EU, and I think it's a great platform to raise awareness and to show the variety of what cooling actually is. And I've tried to give you an idea of a sector. There are several, but I think the safety of our food and the prevention of food waste is very, very important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Very brief and on-time presentation. You mentioned one aspect as well as a challenge for your members, the association, regarding the phase down of HFCs, and you mentioned already, well, the quite common use of ammonia for cold storage. Could you maybe develop a bit more on this challenge? Is it mainly related to investment cost, or is it also some aspects of, because we hear, for example, from other sectors, challenges in terms of also when you move to a different refrigerant, there's also different skills and qualifications that a technician must have. Is it something that resonates with your members as well?
Absolutely. Skills, qualifications, education, that's of course the topic, but it's not only that, it's also a technical issue. It's not so simple to simply change from one refrigerant to another, even if you would want to, because there are specificities in the machinery, and it's not possible to simply change the refrigerant. It is possible for some solutions, but for the vast majority, it is unfortunately not. So, as I said, once you decide for a solution, you work with it. And what we also do see is that not all of our member companies are big companies. There are lots of family-owned companies. And then when they are faced with the question, do I invest in something new, or am I going to build a new cold store, and there is no successor, for example, they simply decide to, when they retire, to close down the business. So it's not so straightforward, because the sector is rather fragmented, I have to say. So there are some big players who are very interested and very active in making their cold stores very energy efficient. So we have lots of cold stores with solar panels on the roof, for example. Some even have built windmills, and they are always looking to be the best performer as energy efficiency is concerned. Also inside, it's very important. It sounds stupid, but it's very important to close the door and keep the doors closed, or to invest in a certain kind of lighting, because in this case, LED lighting, because lighting is a source of heat, and you don't want to have heat in a site that is where the business is cold and refrigeration and cooling. So many have invested in LED lighting and in movement sensors. So there are many initiatives ongoing, but of course the HFC phase down is one of the biggest challenges ahead. Yes.
Yeah. And this links also your point on well, that has been raised before as well by Ingo, and Alex also mentioned this in terms of raising awareness. I think that's clear that it seems to be quite a big challenge for the sector. I see the time; it's 11 a.m. As we are running a little bit late with the presentations compared to the original schedule. I would have just one very brief question to the audience. If you agree to extend the webinar for 10-15 minutes, so that we can have a bit of time for the panel discussion, please click on raise hand, and we have a majority of participants indicating their willingness to do that, then we will continue for another 10-15 minutes, so that we have time first to consider options from the panelists, and also consider questions from the audience. While we get the replies, there was one question I wanted to clarify, a question from the audience. There was asking whether the presentation would be available after the webinar. Well, the webinar will be online on the website, and if all the panelists agree, we will be happy to share the presentations as well on the website, so that they can have a reference. And then we will confirm this once we get the confirmations from all the speakers. But in principle, from our side, there is no problem to share the presentations. There is another question from the audience, and maybe I can refer to this briefly. From Erwin Boermans, he says, "Hi, I'm based in Australia, originally from the Netherlands, with an engineer consultant profile. We experienced already for years several challenges with community-wide transformations. Columnized sectors, regulators are still not used to collaborate for optimal result." I guess this is more a question for Ingo. Do you experience a similar challenge when it comes to projects for district cooling, for example, in terms of getting the alignment from the different actors that need to be involved?
I mean, there are two challenges to this. One is really interlinking people, and this is not necessarily an infrastructure challenge, but the other challenge is, of course, the infrastructure challenge in the case of district heating and cooling. And it is a matter of awareness in a lot of cases. It's a matter of awareness whether people need certain things, or whether it really helps what you ask them to do. It's a matter of awareness for technologies and for community approaches. Now, we like to point to the cities, not because we want to blame them for anything, but this is the level of actors where things can really be done. And it's still a long process. We see it, for example, in The Hague, where they work a lot on it and started involving the communities very early in the process. to make things easier. But it's not as simple as just, well, actually by now even building a street is not simple anymore. But generally you always have the same challenges. But you know, there are always possibilities to solve things. And there's this one case from a district cooling grid that I always like to tell, because there was this flower store owner who didn't like the district cooling grid because it meant construction, and you know, it meant a problem with the business. And the solution in the end was quite simple. So all people from the district cooling company just started to buy their flowers there and went there very often and talked to him very often. And in the end, he became a customer and the most happy person in the area. So it's, you know, it's like with any other business, you need to talk to people a lot and look at their concerns, and then usually you find a solution sooner or later.
Thank you. One additional challenge is the fact that there's, as Christine has pointed, for the industrial refrigeration sector, the sector is also composed of a lot of small companies. So to reach out to all these players that need to be involved, it might be a challenge in terms of infrastructure. It's not as easy as dealing with just a few companies where they have the capacity to implement change on a wide scale. So to reach out to all these people, probably the size of the challenge is in, as you mentioned before, in raising awareness to a scale where this also trickles down to this level, where also those making decisions for small companies are aware and have all the elements to make decisions regarding their infrastructure. We have so we'll continue with just with a few minutes. We have a couple of more questions from the audience. So one is for Christine. So it says, well, Gabriel Millán Lázaro, it says, sorry for the rather technical question. What would be the ideal technical solution to enable low-pin low GWP to be used in current industrial chilling refrigeration? Do you see any way to do this? Very much a 30-year amortization period.
There was some disturbance while you read the question. So could
Sorry,
you repeat?
Christine, just a second. Where you're on mute for the moment.
I think okay. If I understood correctly, because I did not completely hear the question, that's why I'm not answering right away. Right.
Sorry, the question was related.
Okay, the technical question. I have it here in the Q&A. Thank you. What would be? That's, of course, that's the 30 million question, isn't it? To be quite honest, I don't know from the top of my head. I'm quite sure that also the technical people of our members don't know, or the service and maintenance guys, because if there would be the ideal solution, I think it would be rolled out, or it would be being rolled out as we speak right now. So I'm sorry that I can't say much more to that.
Okay, I would maybe reply from our perspective from shecco, just to add to the discussion. We've been working more than 15 years in the sector of natural refrigerants, and also viewing the evolution of all the different measures to phase down HFCs, and previously also the depleted substances. What it's clear now, what we see is obviously there is no one ideal solution that fits all different sectors. This doesn't exist. There is not a magic solution that will solve all problems at once. If you're talking about 30 years perspective, even less, because given this evolution in different sectors, it's what you see is what the different solutions will get a bit more complex. We came from a situation where there used to be one dominant solution and it was applied overall. Now there are different solutions that are more suitable for different segments. As you mentioned, when it comes to natural refrigerants, ammonia is a very good solution for high capacity systems, especially now with the recent developments to develop low charge solutions with a reduced refrigerant charge of ammonia that can reduce significantly the safety risk associated to the use of ammonia while keeping a good operational efficiency and also reducing costs in terms of dealing with all the safety aspects of ammonia. This definitely appears as a very promising solution. Now we see as well a lot of new projects in industrial refrigeration with CO2, and we have even the largest CO2 plant. We know that it's been in operation since early this year with CO2 with over 3.3 megawatt capacity working in the Netherlands, for example. And whether for other sectors there would be possibly where the low charge can be managed, perhaps hydrocarbons is a good solution, for example, for the small type of applications, plug-in units, or even small refrigeration cabinets for supermarkets, and obviously CO2 for a number of applications in commercial and industrial refrigeration.
Yeah, if I may, I fully support what you say.
You're in mute again. If you can click on.
Yeah, thank you. I do fully support what.
You have to click on unmute. I'm sorry.
All right, third try. I fully support what you are saying, but the question was about drop-in solutions. And I think it's true what you say about the new solutions. There is a range of new solutions, and it, of course, as you also rightly said, it depends on your activity and what you do. And it also, of course, depends, as far as ammonia is concerned, about the legal framework, because it's not so long ago that in many European countries it was not allowed from a legal perspective to use ammonia because of security concerns. So, but this is, of course, also changing.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, I've seen the time. I'm going to have to come to a conclusion. Maybe can I suggest a last intervention by each speaker, which is just concluding remarks from your perspective of what's been discussed this morning, what you take as key lessons, and more importantly, what you think is most relevant for going forward in terms of what we've been discussing, the integration of different solutions, the sectoral approach, the drive to improve efficiency. What do you see as a main challenge for the next year in terms of for the industry, how to get involved and what concretely they can do to improve this and to have their say over the coming year? Alix, perhaps we can start with you. What is your take on the discussion today and looking forward?
My take is that we are ahead of a big step change in the cooling sector, and this step change will happen in the next decade. And the entire industry is ahead of a change of mindset and acceleration of innovation and a new way to propose new business models. And we, for example, in Danfoss, we provide solutions to increase the efficiency of products, but we also propose to go with a system approach and new business models, such as I mentioned the Coolit project, which is using digitalization and data management to integrate the entire supply chain. And I believe these big step changes will have a significant impact on sustainable cooling. And this is an opportunity for our sector to become even more profitable and competitive at the global scale.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one just brief clarification, because we received a question from the audience indicating that if you can still clarify the trend of decreasing cooling in buildings.
Yes, I think maybe, because I also note with Ingo, there are two things. The overall trend is for sure a huge increase in the absolute demand for cooling. So the total absolute demand will increase for sure. What I meant is that in NZEP buildings, in nearly zero energy buildings, the relative cooling demand will overall decrease, Though in some cases it will be the opposite, because in some cases when you have a hugely insulated building, then you have a lot of heat gains whenever you use IT equipment, office equipment, electronics, or if you are cooking, then your buildings overheat. So overall, the relative demand for cooling will decrease, but in some cases, highly insulated building will actually require additional cooling demands. So it is indeed a blurred picture. That's why maybe it was not so clear when in my presentation.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, indeed, and as you presented also for the supermarkets, hopefully there will be a moment where the buildings will also be giving and putting back energy into the grid, so that compensates the overall increase in demand by the most advanced technology in the passive houses and zero emissions buildings. Thank you. Ingo, it's your turn. What is your take on today's sessions, and well, especially looking forward, what you recommend for instance to how to get involved and what they can do?
Well, the take on the session is quite simple. I'm not very surprised that we share a vision on most of the points that were discussed, given that we cooperate in the field. The way for the future, I think we all need to do more, and we need to provide more input, and we need to put more efforts into the field. And one point for everyone, except of course for getting involved in Cooling EU and coming to the event and support the initiative, Thomas' decarb initiative, is you all need to be ready to provide data. And I know it's often an issue because there are business sensitivities and so on, but we need this data. If we are not all in the field on the ground are prepared to provide data, we cannot move forward on the policy level.
Okay, thank you. I think that was quite good. Thomas, it's your turn. You have to
yes.
Brief comment.
No, okay, no.
Session and especially
yeah, my brief comment is that there is going to be very exciting times ahead. This system integration will create new opportunities and will create new business models. If we talk about residential buildings and you have a cooling system and you discharge the waste heat from that cooling system into the environment, you're making a mistake. We could be bold and say all the air coolers on roofs, they should be forbidden unless you can prove that you have no other option of using that heat in hot water, into a district heating, into a heat storage, whatever. There's many options that we can use even today. And so I want to repeat that we don't have a lack of technology. We have a lack of system integration, and also with regards to the discussion on refrigerants, we have a lack of a political framework that makes it easier to move into this new direction of connected sectors, electricity, heat, cooling, and the related business models. So I second all my co-panelists. Meet us next week. If you want to talk to all of us here in person on the 19th of June, we will be in Brussels, and there will be an ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Christine, now it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, quite simple again. It's quite easy to be the last to speak. So I can basically support everything that was said for our industry. I think the biggest challenge ahead, of course, I have to say it again, is the HFC phase down and everything that's connected with that. Also, investments in energy efficiency, but also from a different perspective, I have to say there are so many developments in our sector. As I just want to say, e-commerce, for example, all of this needs also a solution from our members, how to make sure that the cold chain is preserved. Also, when somebody orders online food or even frozen food, so there are already solutions available, of course, and it works perfectly fine, but I think this will, in the future, it will gain speed, and with the digitalization, it's only going to get, I think that's the trend for the food industry and for the food supply chain, and lots of innovation will happen there, I think. So I totally support this system approach. I think that's necessary, and I have to mention it again: cooperation, awareness raising, make people aware of what cooling is and what the different applications of cooling are, and I think we will be successful.
Thank you very much, Christine. And with this, we conclude the seminar. It delayed with respect to the original planning, but it was a full program, and we had very interesting inputs and insights from different angles, from cold storage, industrial sector, manufacturers, and also the heat pump sectors. You will see the recording online on the website of Webinar Wednesday. And of course, we will be announcing also the next series of webinars that will take place still before the summer and after the summer, which will include a market perspective on China for the refrigeration sector. We will talk also about, in a different seminar, about hydrocarbons specifically, and there will be other seminars regarding training and the necessary capacity building for the sector. That will be out. Thank you very much once again to our sponsor Danfoss for this sector, for making it possible today, and to all our speakers for the participation and the willingness to organize this session. Thank you, and hopefully see you soon in the next Webinar Wednesday by shecco. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.